Nantucket pine-tip moth. The Nantucket pine-tip moth is a gray insect with irregular patches of red, copper, and gray bands on its wings. This relatively small native moth, approximately 1/4 inch long, is rarely seen, not even during its active period from February to early fall. Anytime from February to late March, the moth emerges from infested pine branches to mate and lay eggs in niches on the base of pine needles and twigs. After several days of incubation, these eggs hatch into worm-like larvae ready to feed on new growth. This yellowish-white to light brown larva will continue to feed on new growth, moving down into the terminal buds until maturity. The larvae then pupate in the hollow feeding cavities. The brown capsule-like pupae will remain in these hollow cavities for several days until they emerge as adult moths. This generation cycle can be repeated 4 or 5 more times during a given year. Damage to pines is caused primarily by the larva of the Nantucket pine-tip moth. This damage is quite noticeable, with browning and dying of infested shoots. A closer view of the infested area will reveal resin beads and fine webbing on the branch tips. When infested shoots or buds are broken open, there will be a hollow space. At the bottom end of these hollow shoots and buds, the larvae or pupae are usually present. Often attacking loblolly pines, the larva of the pine-tip moth will occasionally infest shortleaf, slash, and Virginia pines. While seedlings and saplings less than 6 years old are the primary victims of this pest, loblolly saplings in an intensely managed stand with little to no herbaceous growth are the most susceptible. Stem dieback stunts the growth of the infested pines and creates a bushy effect near the terminal buds. However, unless the pine sapling is severely infested, mortality rarely occurs. For an infested pine plantation, a control method is not generally recommended as it would not be practical or economically feasible. While there are insecticides that can be used to control pine-tip moths, they can be quite expensive. Most of the systemic insecticides are no longer available, but contact insecticides such as Pounce and Sevin can still be purchased. Timing of application is very critical in the effectiveness of these insecticides, with the best time to apply just prior to the emergence of the adult moth. It's very important that the moth or larva make contact with the insecticide in order to control this pest. These insecticides are preferably used on pines where aesthetics are very important, such as on a Christmas tree farm or in an urban setting. The natural progression of stand establishment can significantly reduce susceptibility to Nantucket pine-tip moth infestation. Once the pine stand initiates crown closure, usually when saplings are more than 5 years old and taller than 12 feet, they are not very susceptible to attack. The presence of herbaceous weeds in the stand can also be a natural way of controlling an infestation. The existence of this vegetation provides habitat for natural predators that prey on pine-tip moths. As a preventative method, planting a more resistant pine species can definitely reduce or even prevent an infestation. For example, if the site is suitable for longleaf pine, strongly consider establishing the site with this pine species. Southern pine beetle. With the southern pine beetle, a 1/8 inch long brown to black insect, the female attacks the stressed tree first. Once she successfully attacks the tree, she releases a pheromone called frontalin to inform other southern pine beetles, both male and female, to continue the attack. The first few beetles are killed by the pine's resin flow. These beetles are pitched out along with the resin through the boring holes. As a result, nickel-sized whitish pitch tubes are produced in the bark crevices along the trunk of the tree. If the pine is unhealthy or stressed, it would not be able to continue defending the attack. Eventually, more and more southern pine beetles will attack the tree, building up its population until approximately 2,000 beetles are infested in the weakened pine. This population level is dictated by environmental factors and a 9-year cycle. If the conditions are favorable, this beetle can produce 6 to 8 generations a year. The galleries created by adult beetles and the white legless larvae contribute to the decline of the tree, but the blue stain fungus eventually causes the actual mortality. The fungus is introduced into the tree from the adult beetle. The southern pine beetle carries this blue stain fungus on its body and spreads it into the sapwood as it creates the S-shaped egg galleries. The fungus enhances the nutrient availability to the larvae as they tunnel distinctive feeding lines. This fungus, however, clogs the vascular system of the tree. Moisture is significantly reduced, causing the tree to desiccate. An indication of a blue stain fungus infection is the presence of bluish-black streaks in the sapwood that are right underneath the bark. Another tree symptom that will indicate an infestation is the discoloration of the foliage. Pine needles will follow this color sequence during the entire attack period, from green to yellow to red to brown. After noticeable tree symptoms, the pine succumbs, generally 4 to 8 weeks after the initial attack. Once the pine tree is on the verge of dying, the male southern pine beetle releases a pheromone called verbenone to inform other beetles to halt the attack. By now, the southern pine beetle's population has increased drastically, killing this particular host tree. The beetles now move to the next pine, generally the ones that are in close proximity to the infested one. Because this beetle species is aggressive, it will attack neighboring trees even if they're fairly healthy. There are some control options in place for southern pine beetles. The most common control procedure is to salvage infested pines and harvest a buffer of healthy ones. These cut trees can be utilized, piled, or burned to prevent the spread of the beetle. For infested pines in a residential or commercial area, insecticides such as dragnet or onyx can also be used. Insecticides work better as a preventative method as opposed to a control method. It can be applied to unaffected pine trees that are in close proximity to infested ones. The use of insecticides, however, is not practical for pines in a forest setting. With any control method that is selected, the main success for preventing the spread is to react quickly. Prolonging the control management activity will only allow the beetle to continue spreading, killing more and more pines. Nature can play a huge role in controlling the southern pine beetles as well. There are several predators, such as the clarid beetle, that prey on southern pine beetles. Extreme temperatures, such as continuous temperatures above 100 or below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, can drastically reduce beetle activity. Ips engraver beetle. The Ips engraver beetle can be as destructive as the southern pine beetle if environmental conditions are favorable for attack. Ips, unlike the southern pine beetle, will only attack a pine tree that is declining or extremely stressed from some type of abiotic condition, such as extended root damage or prolonged drought. Because this beetle is not aggressive, the infestation does not generally spread to neighboring trees, creating a large contiguous group of dying trees. Instead, there will be scattered pines or clusters of pines that are infested. Like most bark beetles, the Ips beetle in particular plays a major role in forest succession. It helps destroy pines that are weakened or already dying from other primary causes. With 3 different species of Ips, a specific engraver beetle is basically identifiable by its size. All 3 species are reddish-brown to black, with a distinctive scooped-out and spined posterior. The largest Ips beetle is approximately 1/4 inch long and attacks the entire bole of the tree, while the mid-sized beetle is approximately 1/8 inch long and attacks the upper bole of the tree. The smallest Ips species is approximately 1/16 inch long and also attacks the upper section of the tree. The male Ips beetle will attack the stressed tree first, signaling others to follow with an infestation. If any resin is flowing, the tree will pitch out the first few beetles through boring holes, creating whitish to pinkish small pitch tubes on the bark plates. Depending on the Ips species, these pitch tubes may only exist in the upper trunk, making this tree symptom difficult to detect. Under droughty conditions, however, pitch tubes may not exist at all. The decline of the infested tree occurs more rapidly when attacked by Ips beetles than other bark beetles. The foliage changes color from green to reddish-brown in a matter of a few weeks. Some pines that are infested with the smaller-sized species will exemplify reddish-brown needles only in the upper section of the crown. In an infested pine, the adult beetle creates Y and H-shaped egg galleries underneath the bark. Like the southern pine beetle, this bark beetle also vectors a blue stain fungus into the sapwood when creating galleries. This fungus spreads, enhancing feeding opportunities for the white legless larva, clogging the pine's vascular system. Streaks of bluish-black fungal stains are present in the sapwood. Soon the affected pine responds quickly from this combined action of girdling and desiccation. Eventually, the pine will succumb, approximately 4 to 6 weeks after the initial attack. This bark beetle species may remain active in the area for many months, producing anywhere from 8 to 10 generations a year, ready to spread to the next dying pine. Because the Ips engraver is not very aggressive, the need to take control measures is not as urgent. If there are only a few infested pines scattered in a stand, no control may be warranted. Natural predators such as the clarid beetle or natural environmental conditions such as a cold front may be enough to halt any new infestations. If numerous pines are infested, salvaging the affected area of the stand or harvesting the entire stand may be the best option. A large number of pines infested with the Ips engraver beetle may be an indication that the entire stand is stressed and susceptible to further beetle attack. For infested pines in a residential or commercial area, insecticides such as dragnet or onyx can be used. As a preventative method, the insecticide may be applied to unaffected pine trees that are in close proximity to infested ones. Black turpentine beetle. The black turpentine beetle is somewhat aggressive, but causes less damage than the southern pine and Ips engraver beetles. The largest of the 3 bark beetles, it's dark brown to black and approximately 5/16 inch long. It generally attacks trees injured from lightning strikes or mechanical damage, but will attack stressed pines and recently cut stumps as well. Most of these infestations occur in an urban environment. As with the southern pine beetle, the female beetle attacks first, signaling to the others to continue with the infestation. The pine responds by trying to pitch out the beetles through the boring holes. As a result, large pinkish to whitish pitch tubes, about the size of a walnut, are created in the bark crevices on the lower section of the trunk. Rarely will there be any pitch tubes higher than 7 feet from the base of the tree. The infestation from the black turpentine beetle progresses slowly, producing little to no tree symptoms, except for the large pitch tubes on the trunk. Underneath the bark of an infested pine, there is usually no distinguishing gallery pattern created by the adult beetle. There may be, however, some wide D or J-shaped egg galleries on the surface of the sapwood. Unlike the other two bark beetles, the black turpentine beetle does not vector a blue stain fungus. Because this fungus is not associated with this particular bark beetle, an infestation does not usually cause mortality to the pine. If the tree, however, is heavily infested, the girdling action from the feeding patterns of the adult beetle and the white legless larva can eventually kill the tree. If conditions are favorable, the black turpentine beetle can have 2 to 3 generations a year. Even though the black turpentine beetle is somewhat aggressive, the infestation generally does not spread to neighboring pines. The best control method, therefore, is to analyze the condition of the infested tree. If the pine has more pitch tubes than the size of its diameter, salvage the tree. If the infestation is light, spray an insecticide such as onyx or dragnet on the affected pine. The insecticide should be applied at least 3 feet above the highest pitch tube. As a preventative method, neighboring pines that are not infested can also be treated with an insecticide.
Most deciduous trees are planted for wildlife or aesthetic reasons. They either provide delectable mast for wildlife browse, or their blooming flowers offer a pleasant scenic view. Some species of hardwoods are planted for timber production, such as cherry bark oak and yellow poplar, because of their favorable wood quality. With few detrimental pests to affect hardwoods, they are usually a safe tree to plant. If there are pests that distress deciduous trees, they are usually initiated by some type of human activity, such as mechanical damage, or by adverse conditions such as drought. There are a few pests, however, that attack hardwoods without any clear rationale, and no substantial change to the site or climate. The linden looper is one of these pests. A member of the Geometridae family, this native insect can suddenly appear one year, devouring leaves on a range of host trees. If the infestation is severe, the linden looper can defoliate several hundred acres of hardwoods in just a single month. With a range from the Atlantic coast west to the Rocky Mountains, north from Canada down to the southern United States, this defoliator can cause extensive damage to a broad area. Not surprisingly, insects from this family are considered the most destructive foliage-feeding pests of North America. Appearing in cycles, the linden looper is generally present in high numbers for 2 to 3 consecutive years, and then their numbers suddenly drop. The insect seemingly disappears, often for 5 to 8 years, before appearing again. During the heightened infestation, however, natural predators such as parasitic flies and wasps will increase their presence and significantly reduce the defoliator's population. Other enemies, such as some species of birds, will also prey on the linden looper. The eggs from this insect will hatch in the spring, usually around the same time the buds break. The caterpillars or larvae are quite active during this time, feeding on the foliage of linden, apple, birch, elm, hickory, maple, or oak trees. The injury to infested leaves will first appear as small pinholes, but older larvae will feed more aggressively, consuming the entire leaf. During this 1-month feeding period, the caterpillars mature, slightly changing in appearance from yellowish-green with thin black stripes to pale yellow with thicker black stripes. Reaching 1.4 inches in length when fully grown, the caterpillars will loop their body and then stretch forward using their prolegs, moving to their available food source. They can also produce a generous amount of silk to help them disperse by wind. Around late May, the caterpillars crawl to the ground and tunnel into the soil to pupate. These pupae remain dormant throughout the summer. Normally, by mid-June, the affected host trees that are relatively healthy start rebounding from the attack and grow new foliage. From October to December, the adult moths emerge from the soil and mate. Male moths are light brown with wings that measure approximately 1 3/4 inches from one tip to the other. Females are wingless and gray with black spots. After mating, the female moth will crawl up a host tree to lay her eggs under loose bark on the trunk or large branches, usually 3 to 4 eggs in a cluster. By the following spring, these eggs will hatch, thus starting a new generation of linden loopers. 1 generation of this defoliator occurs per year.
Anosis root rot. Anosis root rot is the most economically significant root disease in Alabama. Caused by a fungus, this disease occurs more often in monoculture pine stands that are intensely managed and thinned. Although all southern pines are susceptible, loblolly and slash are the most affected, while longleaf pine is the least. With most root fungal diseases, they are quite difficult to monitor because the initial damage occurs underground. By the time there are noticeable tree symptoms and physical signs, the disease has manifested in the stand, causing significant damage. As a rule, fungi thrive under relatively warm, moist climates. However, the unique characteristic of Anosis root rot is that this particular fungus is most virulent under dry conditions. In essence, it thrives on soil types that are sandy and well-drained, a descriptive site that is considered high hazard. Anosis root rot does exist in clayey wet soils, but so do numerous other fungi. With these other fungi thriving and competing on the site, many outcompete the Anosis root rot, making it less effective and therefore preventing it from being harmful to its host tree. Anosis is typically found in pine stands growing on well-drained, deep sandy soils that were recently thinned. If the fungal spores exist in the soil and litter layer, they will land on these freshly cut stump surfaces. The fungus colonizes in the stump, multiplying significantly, and then spreads into the root system. If the roots from the cut stump intertwine or touch the roots of residual pines, then the fungus will infect the roots of these healthy trees. Anosis root rot will continue to spread from pine to pine by this root graft process. Tree symptoms and physical signs responding to the infection are generally not noticed until 2 or 3 years after thinning. It generally takes this long for the disease to progress and for the pines to indicate a problem. In some cases, but not always, yellowish brown and white conchs exist in the litter layer at the base of the infected pine. These conchs, if they exist, can usually be seen from December to March. Infected trees will display thinning chlorotic crowns. Some pines with a significant number of decayed roots will lean or simply fall to the ground. A few will merely turn red and die from the girdling of the fungus at the root collar. Eventually, there will be scattered or sections of dead and dying pines in the stand. By now, underground symptoms are recognized. Sections on the roots affected by oonosis will appear white and stringy, with other areas that are resin-soaked and stained. This stained color is usually a cinnamon brown and can be easily identified in the roots. Once mortality begins, 3 years after thinning, infected pines in the stand will continue to die for the next 5 to 7 years. Eventually, nature follows its normal course, and the fungus dissipates in the soil 10 years after the thinning. However, in cooler climates, the effects from the disease can last up to 80 years. The method to control oonosis root rot is really a preventative procedure. Since the disease is mainly influenced by soil type, soil moisture, and thinning practices, these site characteristics and management activities must be strategically analyzed. To decrease the number of possible thinnings on a high-hazard site, plant pines at a lower density, perhaps 400 to 500 trees per acre. If thinning is a necessary management regime for the pine stand, consider a prescribed burn within a few months before the cutting. This understory burn will kill some of the fungal spores, reducing susceptibility. Timing the thinning can also have a huge impact on the effectiveness of the disease. During the summer months, such as July or August, when the temperatures are quite high, thinning may be implemented. The hot temperatures, just like the prescribed burn, will kill some of the fungal spores. If pines established on a high-hazard site are thinned, a fungicide can be immediately applied on the cut stump surfaces. A salt-based fungicide such as borax or sporax should be applied on the stump, completely covering the surface within 48 hours of the thinning. Another stump treatment that is relatively new is a biological weapon using the native fungus Piniophora gigantea. This fungus is a known pathogen of oonosis, outcompeting it and preventing it from colonizing in the stump. If the high-hazard site is suitable for a less susceptible pine species, such as longleaf, convert the stand to that particular species. If by any chance the pine stand is infected with oonosis root rot, document the current status of the residual trees and the progression of the disease. If the pines are saw timber size and only a few are infected, wait a few years before implementing any action. The healthy pines can continue growing until the stand is ready for final harvest. If the majority of the pines in the stand are dying, clear-cut the stand, treat the stumps with an approved fungicide, and replant with a preferably less susceptible species, if the site permits. If the pines are rather small, such as pulpwood size, and there are scattered areas in the stand that are affected, salvage the cluster of infected trees along with a buffer. Immediately treat the cut stump surfaces with borax or sporax to prevent residual pines from contracting the disease.
Welcome, fellow invasive pests, to the Legion of Bugs. Now let us plan to invade America's forest and take over the land.
We have talented pests and pathogens here. Asian longhorn beetle, Cyrex wood wasp, ambrosia beetle, emerald ash borer, son of death.
Here's the plan. First, we infest some trees near our headquarters. When the trees start to die, the fools will cut them down for firewood and load it into their rigs. And we'll ride along to the campground on the firewood. When we get to a nice spot, we'll spring out and begin destroying trees everywhere. They'll carry us right to where we want to be. The fools! Ha ha!
Okay, Super Park Rangers, we know the Legion of Bugs are out there. We know they're hitchhiking to pristine forests on firewood that people bring camping.
Right, Ranger Carlos. And if we don't stop the bugs' evil plan, those forests will be destroyed. There'll be no stopping them.
Gadzooks, it's the bug phone. Ranger Carlos here. Yep. Right? Got it.
What is it, Ranger Carlos?
It's bad. The bugs are on their way. Soon the trees will be under attack. Let's go, Super Park Rangers! Looks like we made it just in time. The bugs almost attacked the forest.
We're foiled again! Confound you, Super Park Rangers! Come on, Legion of Bugs, we're out of here! Let's find some other firewood to travel on and some other forest to destroy!
Super work, Park Rangers. We stopped the firewood from coming into the park. Another forest saved. For now. Moving firewood means moving invasive pests into the forest. The Super Park Rangers can't be everywhere. We need people like you to do your part. I won't move firewood ever again. But what else can I do?
Right. Don't move firewood. Be on the lookout. If you see bugs you don't recognize, call the authorities. We need you to help protect our forests.
Well, that's a lesson I won't forget.